Harlequin presents and HarperAudio present Cinderella Sisters for Billionaires, featuring The Maid Married to the Billionaire and The Maid's Pregnancy Bombshell by Lynne Graham, performed by Melanie Crawley. The Maid Married to the Billionaire. Chapter 1. A large and expensive 4x4 awaited Lorenzo Durante when he arrived in his private jet at Norwich Airport. It had been a long time since he had driven himself. Limousines were more Enzo's style. He gritted his teeth. He didn't whine about stuff, and he wasn't a kid anymore. He had got himself into his current predicament, and he would get himself out of it again. That he was unlikely to enjoy the experience of relinquishing his affluent way of life went without saying, but then wasn't that part of the punishment? His grandfather, Edoardo Martelli, had, however, insisted that the challenge he had set wasn't a punishment. Edoardo had preached at length about the need for Enzo to grow up. Just remembering that demeaning phrase made Enzo seethe, his quick, hot temper ready to spark. He compressed his lips, his lean, darkly handsome features taut. He was 27 years old, and aside from his university studies and spells as an intern, he had never worked a day in his life. Why would he have? Orphaned as a baby, he had inherited billions from his late father, Narciso. His maternal grandparents were nowhere near as wealthy as his paternal grandparents had been, yet they had fought them for custody and, probably because they were younger and healthier than their opponents, had won the case. In court, they had promised to raise their grandson in what they had termed an ordinary life. Sadly, they had had their work cut out on that front, Enzo acknowledged ruefully, thinking of the legion of Durante relations and hangers-on who had constantly invaded his childhood with their visits and invitations, their ridiculously lavish gifts, and their eagerness to tempt him into the supremely privileged, permissive lifestyle his late father had enjoyed. Somewhere around his 23rd birthday, after he had completed his education in the business world, he mused grimly, the seduction had begun to work. Fresh from university and nursing a broken heart, Enzo had been vulnerable to the temptation of the playboy lifestyle. That was where it had started. The slow, steady sink into a self-indulgent decadence that had appalled the grandparents, who in every way had truly been his parents. And a few years on, the inevitable had happened. His two lifestyles had collided and fatally clashed. The scandalous headlines their grandson attracted had been studiously ignored by Edoardo and Sophie Martelli. But after he had made the fatal mistake of attending a social occasion drunk, with an equally drunken partner, the balloon had gone up on forgiveness. He still broke out in a cold sweat when he recalled that evening. The next day he had attempted to apologize. Edoardo Martelli had refused to listen, while his wife had simply sobbed in embarrassment and heartbreak, because her husband seemed determined to disown the grandson she adored. That had been the shocking moment when Enzo had realized that it didn't matter how much money he had, how many friends, or what exciting opportunities to enjoy himself still shone on his horizon. He had finally appreciated how much more his family meant to him, and his loving grandmother's distress had shamed him. And coming to England, taking charge of a small company recently acquired by his grandfather, and striving to live a more useful, normal life was the price of reconciliation. Only there was nothing normal about it, Enzo conceded in exasperation. Not on his terms.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?